Good morning. A warm welcome to the Humanist community in Silicon Valley Sunday Forum. To those joining us on Zoom and to those joining us on Facebook, my name is Alex Havacy. I'm Vice President of the Humanist community. The Humanist community is a chapter of the American Humanist Association. Humanism is a secular, reality-based philosophy of life that affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good. We value freedom, health, happiness, fairness, compassion, and using science and reason to acquire and apply knowledge. If these words describe your thinking, we invite you to become a member of the Humanist community if you have not yet done so. Membership forms are available on our website at humanist.org. That's humanistplural.org. A special welcome to those who are with us for the first time. We invite you to continue listening to our weekly forums and other events. You can find all our events listed on the website, humanist.org. Please aid us in continuing to present these forums by donating to the Humanist community. You can find out how to donate to our organization on our website. Today, Jessica Kemper-Lytle and Brett Parker will tell us about the American Atheists California State Advocacy Team. The American Atheists California State Advocacy is building a team of atheists, humanists, secular Californians interested in advocating for church-state separation legislation at the state level. They focus on healthcare, education, and special privileges for religion, plus other forms of religious discrimination. And here to discuss this advocacy team are Jessica Kemper-Lytle, the chair of the American Atheists California State Advocacy Team, and Brett Parker, the state policy manager with American Atheists. All right, Jessica, do you want to open?
Yeah. Brett, did you want to share your screen and I can kick us off?
Yeah. If I'll need permission from the host for that, but.
Oh, okay.
Great.
While we're waiting on that, I guess we could go ahead and introduce ourselves real quick. Jessica, do you want to kick us off there?
Sure. So my name is Jessica Kemper-Lytle. As he said, I am the state director for Northern California for American Atheists, and I'm also on the board for the atheist community of San Jose. I grew up Catholic in a small rural town in Ohio. I stopped going to church pretty much as soon as I could. But I didn't start using the atheist label to describe myself until many years later. As much as I feel it is important to use the atheist label to describe who I am in an effort to destigmatize it, I feel my identity as a humanist speaks much more to my values. My professional background is in speech-language pathology, and my clinical experience is with children with disabilities. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you, and I'm super excited to tell you about our team.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brett Parker. I'm the state policy manager at American Atheists. We were chatting earlier, but I work remotely from Kansas City, Kansas, so happy to be joining you all in California. A little bit about my background. I started out as a public school teacher, got very involved with the Teachers Association, and that led me to run for the Kansas State House when funding was cut in Kansas. I don't know how much news folks from around the country remember about Kansas, but in 2010, we elected a man named Sam Brownback governor, and he had this great idea that they were gonna, slash all state revenue and things would be great. It turns out that didn't work out so well, and we felt the impact at our schools. So that fired me up to say, well, someone should do something about this, and then quickly looked around and realized that meant that I had to do something about it. So I ran for the State House in 2016. I got reelected twice after that, and then moved out of my district last summer and joined the American Atheist team. So my work with American Atheists is supporting volunteers like Jessica who are trying to build movements within their states and teams of volunteers, and also tracking legislation around the country in state houses, submitting testimony if there's not someone on the ground to do so, and meeting in coalition with other advocacy groups when our areas of interest overlap. All right, so we have A fairly straightforward agenda today. Jessica's going to talk a little bit about some of the data that we look at for the secular community. That's going to lead us into why we focus on state advocacy as opposed to, federal or local, which are also very good things to do. And then we want to talk a little bit about our California specific efforts that are kind of new about the beginning of this year. I guess late last year is when we started putting it together.
All right, so the U.S. Secular Survey. Since the founding of the United States, non-religious people have been an important but often invisible segment of American society. Despite the fact that we make up a significant and growing percentage of the population, there was remarkably little known about the non-religious people in our communities. The 2019 U.S. Secular Survey was an effort to address that gap. And as you can see, our original goal was to get about 5,000 to 10,000 respondents, but we ended up getting 34,000 respondents. So lots of very good data. The report is available at secularsurvey.org. And before I get into the nitty gritty, I also wanted to say there have been a few offshoots from that report. So there's also a non-religious youth report, a Black non-believers report, as well as non-religious women, which was just released last week. All has very, very good data. Okay, so first let's examine how we determined which areas and communities were considered very religious. We asked participants to consider the community they live and tell us whether the community is very religious, somewhat, a little bit, or not at all religious. As you can see, nearly a third of participants said that their community was very religious. We also divided states into 4 categories based on the percentage of participants who said their community was very religious. And those participants, almost half were from rural locations or small towns, and they were much more likely to say that their community was considered very religious as compared to other settings. So how does this affect stigmatization? So I was struck by this map when I first saw it because it bears quite a similarity to the previous map. You can see easily that the states that have a higher percentage of very religious communities also have heightened stigma against non-religious people. And the data bears that out. For example, states with the most participants saying they live in very religious communities like Mississippi and Utah also have the highest rate of stigmatization. We also looked at policy priorities among non-religious people, asking both how important various issues are to them, and also what are the 3 highest policy priorities for organizations representing non-religious people. What I found interesting is there's often a stereotype that non-religious people, like all we care about are religious displays on public land. But as you can see, that was the least identified policy priority. The top 3 were maintaining secular public schools, opposing religious exemptions that allow for discrimination, and access to abortion and contraception.
So with some of that background in mind, we want to talk a little bit about why we've chosen to focus the bulk of our advocacy at the state level. I will say American Atheists as an organization does some federal advocacy, and a lot of our affiliate groups all across the country will do advocacy at the local level, and we like to support that as well. But the bulk of our policy advocacy happens at the state level. So there's a number of reasons for this, but one of the biggest ones is positive policy change is possible at the state level. It's much more accessible than the federal government to volunteers and to smaller advocacy organizations. So it's possible to make a difference on positive legislation. Being active can help avert negative policy change. One of the biggest ones, and this applies regardless of whether you live in Colorado, California, right, or Alabama or Kansas for that matter, it's just letting lawmakers know that our community exists. We, as a non-religious community, are really underrepresented in the minds of policymakers. and oftentimes in the media as well. It's also the opportunity to build awareness and support for change long term, even if it's not a legislative battle we're going to win, next month. And then we get to show other groups, local groups, right, that we're doing good work, bring attention, invite participation as a united community. So just some examples of some of the state legislation that we work on, and this is by no means a comprehensive list. On the positive side, we work to limit religious exemptions, ending the harmful practice of conversion therapy. We work a lot in areas that are separation of church and state, or trying to prevent harm being done in the name of religious beliefs to everyone else. And you can see that on the negative side too, right? The things that we oppose, some of it is around keeping our public schools strong and secular, but also, standing up when the religious right is trying to impose a singular view on reproductive freedoms, or on denying care to LGBTQ patients. There's another great piece of data that comes out of American Atheists specific to state advocacy. And this is one of my favorite things. Every year we put out a State of the Secular States report. And this is, if you can see on the right there, like a state by state scorecard on key policy areas that we track across the country. That California has that background in blue there, and the little subheading under there means it's considered a state that's relatively strong protections for religious equality. It doesn't mean it's perfect by any means. If you look on that scorecard, anything that is a blue empty triangle, and you can also access it through the link below, means that's a policy that we would like to see adopted that hasn't been. Anything that is a red solid triangle, which are pretty rare on the California scorecard, means that's a negative policy that is in place in California. I will tell you, this looks a lot more positive in California, as you can imagine, than a lot of other states. But there's work to be done everywhere, no matter what. And this is, frankly, it's a great resource for us internally on our team. For me, trying to track state legislation across all 50 states, it's nice to be able to just turn to the California page if I want to quickly look up some of the things that we're worried about. And it's also a great tool that is available to everyone, local groups, to the media, to lawmakers as well. So with that background, one of the visions that we have with American Atheists for doing state advocacy work effectively is trying to empower teams on the ground in these states. I'm, like I said, I'm the state policy manager. I'm one person. We track legislation across 50 states plus DC and Puerto Rico. I try and get a lot done in a workday, but certainly am not on the ground in every single place. And for the sake of having the biggest voice possible, but also just giving people an opportunity to grow as leaders and advocates in this work, the model we're trying to build out is this volunteer state advocacy team. So this started before I came on board, I think really out of the pandemic, trying to find different ways to engage folks. But in 3 states, we started a model program in Oklahoma, Florida, and Virginia of volunteers to do state advocacy work, and to use some of the tools that I get to use, as a full-time staff member, and train folks up in their advocacy. As a former school teacher, part of my job that is always near and dear to me is just getting to, meet people where they are and try and help them kind of advance one more step, right? So if someone has never done anything ever regarding advocacy, attending a rally or sending an email to their state representative is a great first step. But as we dig into this, we'll talk about some of the other things that we help support people in doing. Our California team really came about late last year. Jessica and Evan and our team having conversations about how to bring together a group in California to do this work. And I think we officially launched, Jessica, either in December or January with our first meeting, and have been training everyone up on some of the tools and available. So I'll let Jessica take it from here.
Yeah, so the California State Advocacy Team is intended to build state level capacity for advocacy by developing and supporting working teams of volunteers, as Brett was saying. provide a higher level of training and support to advocates in California in order to advance our shared advocacy goals. Provide resources, tools, and connections necessary to individual volunteers to allow them to grow as advocates and become more fully engaged in secular movement advocacy, as well as support American Atheist state legislative goals. So American Atheist supports us in a variety of ways, including access to Basecamp, which is the task management program we use, access to Bill Track 50, which is a state legislative tracking program. It's great. It allows us to set up alerts on the bills that we need to kind of keep an eye on. American Atheist also provides focus advocacy training and technical assistance for advocacy work, including political strategy, grassroots advocacy, coalition building, and developing relationships with lawmakers. They also help develop advocacy resources, including one-pagers, testimony, letters of support, and draft legislation. American Atheist helps promote critical advocacy action through their action alert system, as well as helping organizing and promoting events. And then, so these are the 3 bills that our team has decided to focus on for 2022. The first is SB 523. It is the Contraceptive Equality Act of 2021, and it seeks to expand access to birth control. AB 1666 provides civil protections for anyone involved in abortion care in California from out of state. And this bill is intended to counter vigilante abortion laws like the one in Texas. And then ACA 6 improves Native American Indian education. So this bill seeks to replace the current whitewashed curriculum with accurate history and social science instruction that reflects the state's true history as it relates to Spanish Catholic missions.
So building on what Jessica was talking about there too, we try and coordinate with as many secular groups as we possibly can. And one of the things that's been fun working on this in California is that there's just a much better network, frankly, of secular organizations right across the state. Part of that goes back to that, data on where the most non-religious people are living, but also California is, basically a country unto itself, right, when it comes to size. And so there's the chance to really have this effort be something that springs out of input from groups across the state and have a chance, hopefully, to focus a voice of the secular community. And Jessica was talking about, this is backed by American Atheists, right? And we try and provide the tools. In my experience with advocacy, a lot of times when that's the case, there can be sort of like a heavy hand with that. And that is the last thing that we want. Our goal, if this should take off and, like dream scenario of the California team, like raising money and hiring their own staff and never, being affiliated with American Atheists again, but doing great secular advocacy work, like we're thrilled. We just want to incubate advocates where we can and provide support. And this is one of those great ways because we get to connect with groups and do meetings like this. We work in coalitions, though, not just with other secular advocacy groups. Depending on the issue we're advocating for, it's a really great chance to build connections with different policy groups. So, for example, in Florida, we spent a lot of time this past session working with Equality Florida, trying to combat a lot of the really bad anti-LGBTQ policies. We talk with reproductive rights groups. We talk with other groups that represent the secular community, right? Like Freedom from Religion Foundation or CFI. We work with Americans United for Separation of Church and State. We also work with a decent number of other religious minority groups, whether that's, groups representing folks of Jewish faith or Muslim faith, even groups that feel underrepresented in Christianity, right? Who don't think that sort of the weaponization of their faith in American politics speaks to their values, and who have a pluralistic view of religious freedom, religious equality, and believe in a separation of church and state. One of the main things that we try to do in this work is to testify at committee hearings in state legislatures. And this can seem like a daunting thing if you've never stepped foot in the state house or if you've never watched one of these hearings. But the best way to get comfortable with it, frankly, is to just observe them. California has a little bit more professional of a state legislature than the average state, just because the districts are bigger. It takes a little bit more, effort to get elected to them. But nonetheless, the people serving as state senators or assembly members are just like you. They're people from the community who, want to live out their values and want to have an impact on the state, hopefully for the better. But there's nothing magical about it. They're not special. I remember when I thought about running for office, my assumption was, well, surely I would have had to have started, 7 successful small businesses and have my law degree and all of these, imagined qualifications. And really, it was just being someone who cared a lot and was willing to work hard at it. The same goes for this advocacy work. Testifying at hearings, we as American Atheists try and support this effort too. Frankly, I write a lot of testimonies for folks and send them, and we do back and forth write and adjust them to be in their voice. Usually it's just speaking for 2 to 3 minutes, especially depends on how many people are testifying on a bill. But it's a chance to show up literally, be present in front of lawmakers and have input on the shaping of laws. I'll say I sat on a lot of legislative committees where the course of legislation was drastically changed because one person offered a view that hadn't been considered before, and it gave everyone pause, whether that was to say this bill is a bad idea or to amend it in some way or to give a fresh urgency to moving something ahead. So testifying at hearings is a big way to have an impact. That said, California is a big state and not everyone we interact with is going to have either the means or the convenience of showing up at the state house on a regular basis. We also do lobby days, and actually I say we do them, but also this is a great chance to get your feet wet if another organization that you care about offers one. Just the chance to show up to the state house in a group and get your feet wet talking with lawmakers or their staff. That's a novel concept to me. California lawmakers have really great policy staff. For us in Kansas, I had a college intern who showed up twice a week, and we shared like an office assistant amongst 3 or 4 representatives. So I love working with state legislators who have professional staff, right, who get to dig in on these issues. But like I said, it's one of the easier ways to just get involved and be in a group to do it and to feel kind of some of the energy of that. These days with COVID, there are sometimes opportunities to do virtual lobby days. Jessica and I were a part of one last fall with California Free Thought Day, where we set up Zoom meetings for people to meet with lawmakers or their staff. And that way, everyone could do it from their own living room. I know in a lot of ways, we're probably growing tired of always doing everything over Zoom, but when it comes to saving yourself, a drive to the state house and back, it is pretty convenient. One other thing that we work with, Jessica talked about this a bit before, is this program called Bill Track 50. And so our volunteer teams, we train them up on how to do this and how to track legislation themselves. But if you're just curious about what's going on in your state or what bills are being tracked, anyone can go onto our website and look at this map of legislation across the country. If you click on a state, it will pull up the list of bills that we're tracking and tell you the topic and whether we're for them or against them, or we think they should be amended. One quick note on here, the shading is not due to like positive or negative. It's just the sheer number of bills we're tracking. And I think this screenshot was taken last summer as the Texas legislature had like 4 different sessions with all the special sessions they had. So Texas appears bright red because there were sometimes 4 versions of the same bill filed over the year. Nonetheless, this is a really nice tool. And if you can kind of see, what's going on in other states too, if you're ever curious. So I want to pause there. I know we've been talking at you for a bit here, and see one, I guess, Jessica, if there's anything you wanted to add, but on top of that, see if there are questions from the group about the work that we do and, effective state advocacy and the chance to be a part of that.
Yeah, no, I'm anxious to hear what you all have questions about.
Stop the share too, so that we can all see each other again.
Alex, you're muted.
Yeah, I was hoping you could put the websites you mentioned in the chat box.
Yes, let me pull that up. There's a couple different ones. There's one that has a link to, well, there's a few, I guess. Let me pull them all together here.
Okay.
But just for everyone's reference, there's one that's that secular survey data, if you're curious about that. There's also the State of the Secular States report that we do, where you can look at how, the report cards from states around the country and read a little bit more about some of those topics that we track on a regular basis. And the last one that we touched on was that map that shows the legislation we're tracking by state. So I will pull that up and drop each of those in the chat.
Okay. Meanwhile, Judy, I see you've got your hand up.
Yes, I have a question for Jessica. Jessica, I'd like to understand how you got started with the state advocacy team in California, how you reached out to different groups and found people who were interested in doing advocacy work at the state level, how often you meet, I presume on Zoom rather than in person, and are people from all over the state or pretty much just from Evans area and your locality in the Bay Area? I mean, where are the people coming from? How did you find them? How did they connect with you?
Okay. Yeah. All right. That was a lot of questions.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're good.
I'm just trying to get the picture.
Yeah.
Just give me the picture.
So I'm trying to remember how kind of this all got started. I think it was one of the talks Evan Clark came to the atheist community of San Jose and gave a talk to us. And after that talk, I connected with him, and kind of before I knew it, we were starting this team. So right now we're still kind of working on outreach. This group is actually the first group that we're talking to. But our goal is to talk to groups all across the state. So right now we do have representatives from Northern California and Southern California, but there are definitely more cities that we would like to target, that we still have more outreach to do for that, for sure.
I'd just add in too, some of the initial outreach, I think, just because they were the connections that we had, were to some American Atheist affiliates. But to Jessica's point, like, we are in the growing outreach coalition building stage, right? Like, the goal is to pull in new folks continually from all around the state and all of the organizations that would like to have a voice in state legislative advocacy.
Yeah, I was just curious also about when you track, excuse me, you track bills, you have people tracking. Is most of this done online? I mean, is this something you're doing at your computer at home?
Yes, that's a great question. So the Bill Track 50 program is basically it's a website we log into, and it pulls bill information from all the different state legislative websites. It's a really handy tool. Frankly, I wish I had it as a legislator, even just for when I was tracking stuff in my own state, because you can, once you find a bill, right, you can sort of put it on your priority list like we do and get notifications when it has hearings or it gets voted on. But to me, I think the number one benefit is you get to set up searches for bills that you might not have known existed based on whatever you're interested in. So, we run bill searches around, school voucher bills, right? And put in keywords that we think will flag those. We run them around, there's been a slate of bills this year to try and exempt religious organizations from emergency orders that apply to everyone else, right? And so you have to kind of play with it to come up with the right keywords, but then it will generate your list for you and flag for you when new bills are there to look at. So it's all on the computer at this point, though. The thing that I really like about working with our advocacy teams is normally my morning starts with just poring over those from a lot of different states. It's much more enjoyable to do that with Jessica and the folks who have stepped up, right? And we can talk about them together. And our individual state teams do their own searches, right? So our group in California said, hey, let's play around with this, learn how to use this tool, and research the things that we care about in California. And then let's talk through all of those bills and see, which ones we want to really take a proactive approach to.
You have a team in every state now?
No, we would, long term, that would be the dream. We have them in 5 states right now. So we started with those 3, Oklahoma, Florida, and Virginia. For this legislative session, we've added this team in California and one in Colorado as well. Part of it is it takes a critical mass, right? The goal is not to just turn to a Jessica and say, hey, I've been doing this. Now we're going to have you do this on a volunteer basis, for your state. We really like to start with at least 5 or 6 folks who can kind of share some of that load. Some people might want to be an expert in tracking the bills. Others are really love doing the outreach to other groups and that sort of thing. So we're trying to add a few more each year. But I will say part of that is just the capacity of my role and not wanting to add too many and then suddenly be in a position where Jessica and Evan or their team need something for me, I'm not available or, can't give them a training or a testimony or talking points or whatever they may need.
Okay. Dana or Jerry?
Dana.
Okay.
Yeah, I wondered who came up with that bill tracking program and how long has it been around? Do you know?
I don't. I know there's a handful of different ones. We like ours. There are, I think, several out there. So when we work with advocates from other, organizations that track, sometimes they have different ones. I am not a, computer programmer person, but I will just say, knowing the legislative side of it, I'm sure it is a big lift to put that together, especially when you're working across multiple states, because, the California State Legislative website is pretty solid, but it is a mixed bag across the country on how helpful some of those are and how good they are with, even just how transparent they are, right? Some states take a week before they post anything, and that means, those trackers have to deal with that too.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I would think that I mentioned churches have similar tracking devices. You might want to even tap into theirs. Is the one you use, was that created by? Never mind. I'm not muted. Okay, was that created by American Atheists or?
No, it's a program we purchase. But the great thing, and this is part of the reason why it's great to build out these secular advocacy teams, is because we can add our volunteers to it, right, and train them on it. And we paid a one-time, or an annual fee, I guess, but it's not more expensive to add, Jessica and Evan and the other folks in California and teach them how to do it, as opposed to me just using it myself for my job. So it ends up being a really nice resource that we can share with the team, the advocacy teams.
Okay. Do you? I suppose it's outside the range of the organization, but I imagine something like this might work on a municipal level also, although it's harder to keep track of what they're doing. I think in Sunnyvale, you'd have to pretty much go to each meeting to see what's happening.
Yeah, like I said, my role is focused on state legislative work, but a lot of the affiliate groups we work with do a lot of advocacy at the local level, and we'll do. My colleague Sam McGuire really helps oversee all of the affiliate programs, but between the two of us, we'll do trainings on local advocacy too. Like a couple of months ago, this year is flying by. I guess it was back in December. We did a couple conversations around school boards, right, and all of frankly, the pressure that good school board members are under lately, with people coming up and shouting at them about what books they want banned and that sort of thing. And so we talked about some of those issues, but also what does it look like to be a positive advocate, for your public schools, and to have your voice heard. Well, I should say positive. Depends on, I guess, who your school board is, but to make your voice heard either way, at that local level. And so there is an effort to support some of those works as well. And then, people who come to the state advocacy work are often not just singularly focused as individuals on that work, right? Like our team in Virginia, I know some of the leaders on that are also really involved with some other local organizations and do a lot at their city council meetings and their school board meetings. So we're certainly not trying to tell anyone, you should only make your voice heard at the State House. This just tends to be a uniquely effective space for us to provide some resources for.
Are there any specific issues in California that you're concentrating on?
Yeah. Well, Jessica, do you want to circle back on the bills that we had flagged there?
Yeah.
Not that this is the comprehensive list by any means.
So the little team that we have so far, we all got trained in the Bill Track 50, and then, we were all kind of practicing using it. And then we targeted a few. I think we had a list of maybe 7 or 10 that we were kind of choosing from. We narrowed it down to 3. We're kind of also looking at what's going on in some other states and looking at, reproductive rights and how they are in jeopardy. So we are focusing on a Contraceptive Equality Act, making birth control more accessible to anyone who needs it, as well as civil protections for anyone involved in abortion care. That's AB 1666. And that is specifically intended to counter those vigilante abortion laws like the ones in Texas. So if anyone comes from out of state to California seeking reproductive care, that they are exempt from those other laws. And then the last one was the Native American Indian Education Act, the ACA 6. And that is looking to replace the current curriculum with more accurate history as it relates to the Spanish Catholic missions. As it stands right now, I was looking at it last night, I think students in California get like 1 or 2 little lessons, like their middle school curriculum. And it's from the point of view of the colonizers, and there really isn't any discussion on the atrocities of the Native American people from California.
I'd also add too, I'm going to drop a link here to the California specific scorecard. And actually, if it's all right, I can share my screen and kind of show you what this looks like again.
Yeah.
So maximize this. So this is on our State of the Secular States report. This is the California specific page. And actually, let me drop back. So not to make anyone motion sick here with my scrolling, but this is where, if you go to that atheist.org/states link that I dropped, this is generally our State of the Secular States report. We put it out at the beginning of each year, and it's we always update it with what happened from the previous year. So you can explore some of the topics, but then you can also look at individual states. So this key is kind of important. If it's a filled in circle, that means a policy has been enacted, whether it's positive or negative. If it's an empty circle, then it has not. So California is in pretty good shape, but some of the things that we've talked about, so for example, under constitutional and non-discrimination protections, the ones we're looking for, the proactive policies, California does a great job on. That said, there are some religious exemptions to non-discrimination laws that concern us a little bit. Thankfully, California does not have a religious test for holding office. You'd be surprised how many states still have rules about that. When it comes to special privileges for religion, this is one that we've worked on in some other states. California, thankfully, has a mandated reporting for child abuse for clergy. So just like teachers or social workers are mandated reporters, they have that requirement as well. But there are some, again, some negative things that we would see that are in place, mostly around limited tax filing requirements and property tax exemptions and parsonage exemptions on tax. We look at healthcare bills. California we track medical aid in dying laws, and California is in good shape there. But there is some ability for providers to refuse to provide abortion or contraceptive care. There are some exemptions from civil and criminal punishment for faith healing. This is one of the things I love about this resource, is that these are not really laws that we, on a day-to-day basis necessarily spend a lot of time wondering how they exist state by state. But it is nice to be able to just come to one place and look at, hey, if we could do better on the issue of religious equality and separation of church and state, what are some things that we'd want to look for? And then lastly, we look at education and youth. So one of the things we talked about, I think, Jessica, early in our conversations was just being surprised that California is not one of the states that has eliminated child marriage. This is honestly a fairly recent movement in state legislation. Only a few states now have done this over the last few years, but there's a big move to not provide any exceptions to marrying before you're 18, because more often than not, there are young women who are coerced into marriage and end up in abusive relationships, or maybe as a result of some pretty extreme religious beliefs of their parents. So anyway, this is a resource. I don't mean to walk through every single policy on here, but it is an interesting thing to take a look at when it comes to, long-term, what are some changes that, we could see in a state like California. It's also a really nice tool for talking with the people who represent you, right? As a lawmaker, the most effective advocates are the ones, whether they're volunteers or professional, are the ones who are providing a resource to you, who are giving you information you didn't already have. And to have that in a nice, packaged way is a pretty handy tool, even if, whether the lawmaker is incredibly supportive or not of separation of church and state. It's a chance to say, hey, let's look at this and here, a whole menu of things that we would like to see accomplished.
So is part of your training teaching people how to present an argument without hitting any
Yes, so we do a lot of trainings around talking with lawmakers and even just how to set up those meetings, right? And that will vary a little bit state by state, but whether it's possible to do them via Zoom, whether your lawmakers have town hall meetings around, in your area, or district offices that you can go to. But yeah, that's one of the things. And actually, Jessica, I don't know if you and I have talked about this yet, but I think that maybe part of the next plan for both you all and our Colorado team, who are kind of on the same track of being new this year, is to talk about, okay, how do we breaks from lawmakers when they're back home, right? How do we set up these meetings? How do we go and talk? And one of the things, sorry, I know I've been talking at you for this one for a while now, but one of the things I really like about that is it's a lot easier to just talk with a lawmaker when you're just introducing yourself and saying, hi, I'm Brett Parker. I'm, part of this secular advocacy team. Just want to put this resource in your hand and give you an example of some of the things that, are of concern to us. That's a lot lower pressure than having to meet with a lawmaker and saying, this one bill is terrible, and, feeling like it's the weight of the world on your shoulders to try and convince them in a 10-minute meeting why they should vote, against a bill or for a bill. This is a great chance to just start out by just being able to introduce yourself and say, hey, here I am. I'm a part of this community. I hope you'll keep our interests in mind. And here's a resource on some of the things that we're concerned about.
Okay. So I don't know if that's in the chat room yet or not, but if someone is interested in joining the team, they contact you, Jessica,
Yeah.
a specific site?
Yeah, let me drop my email address in the
Okay.
chat. Anyone who's interested in joining, we're obviously looking for more representatives from the Bay Area. And yeah, as of right now, we're meeting once a month on Zoom. And yeah, I'd like to welcome anyone who's interested in joining to come along with us.
I'm happy to drop my email as well, but if you reach out to me, probably the first thing I'm going to do is connect you with Jessica. So if anyone has any other questions, I'm happy to answer as well.
How long does the training usually take?
You know, this is, we do regular trainings as an organization, as American Atheists. So we'll do, like we just did one on presenting testimony, and we do those for about an hour, and we invite leaders from across the country who are involved with these groups or other volunteer groups. But our specific, like our California group, we meet once a month. We try and keep it to just about an hour, you know, so we're not trying to like dump a graduate course on people, right? You know, hours and hours. The goal is just to kind of help everyone keep moving forward. And the nice thing in California compared to the other states that we work in is that the legislative session goes through most of the year. Whereas like our Virginia team has about 2 months of activity, and you have to kind of cram for that. In California, it's been nice working with Jessica and Evan and the team to be able to say, you know what, let's digest what we talked about for this month. Let's look at some pretty basic action steps for the next month. And then we'll just build on that, you know, each subsequent month.
So what specific task would you hope have people perform? Other than, I assume, advocating itself, are there other associated tasks, keeping track of bills and so on?
Yeah, Jessica, you want to talk about just what we've been working on since our last meeting regarding, you know, we talked about the bills we're going to track, and you know, you did some outreach and Louis did some outreach.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, for example, the tasks that I completed for this past month, we're starting to reach out to reproductive rights, other like coalition building, essentially. So reaching out to Planned Parenthood Action Fund, reaching out to NARAL, trying to build relationships, build connections with them to see how we can work together, you know, for these shared goals that we have. Also reaching out to bill sponsors. So in the Bill Track 50, it'll tell you specific, you know, which legislatures were sponsoring the bill, to, you know, reach out. And Brett is super helpful with that, helping us kind of put together like letters, what we want to say to them, and just start making relationships with them as well.
And then beyond that, just some examples from other states, you know, our California group has now been through training on using Bill Track 50, but for some of our other folks, you know, if they're just joining brand new, we'll walk them through that. We'll, you know, show them their task for the next month, maybe to go through that training and then to meet with me and talk about any questions that they have and play around with creating their own search for bills, just so they can do that. Or like our Florida team, which has been around for 2 years now, that coalition work that Jessica's talking about in California and Florida, they've made it along to where they worked with a coalition to proactively introduce a piece of legislation for this session. So, you know, they met with Equality Florida and the reproductive rights groups there and Jews for a Secular Democracy. And I'm probably missing another coalition group too, but they brought together a team of advocates to say, this legislation is something we all support. And then to reach out to lawmakers to find someone to introduce it. So that those kinds of tasks are pretty common, as well as reaching out to other groups in the secular community, right? So this is, frankly, this is part of it, right? Is Jessica reaching out and saying, hey, we'd like to connect with these groups. You know, our Colorado group, again, is kind of in that same boat right now where they're just several months into forming and starting to meet. So they're doing some outreach to groups around the state of Colorado who might want to be a part. That what we try and do, and hopefully I do a good job of this, is make it as manageable for everyone as they want, right? So like Jessica was talking about reaching out to lawmakers or other organizations. Frequently when we ask people to do that, I will write a sample letter. And my advice is, if your comfort level right now is copying and pasting that and, you know, filling in your name and the lawmaker name is appropriate, great. If, you know, you want to take that and build off of it or add your own commentary and that's something you feel comfortable with, then great, let's jump into that. And then I think one of the more I don't think it needs to be, but one of the things that can be a little bit intimidating is the actual meeting with lawmakers. And the way that that has looked in other states, again, is it depends on the comfort level of volunteer. Someone like Jessica knows the bill and is happy to like lead in talking through, this is the bill we care about. Then someone like me will sit in on the meeting and just be there if she needs a resource. We have other folks who it's their first time and emailing the lawmaker staff to schedule the meeting. That's their next step of growth. And they'll sit in on the meeting, but I'll be the one going through the talking points. And so we try and balance that. Again, my general philosophy in this is that the goal is just to move everyone, one step forward on what they're feel empowered and comfortable to do. The goal of these state advocacy teams isn't to enact one policy next month and then be done. It's not all or nothing game. The goal is to continue to build the voice of the secular community in state legislative advocacy. And really the long-term goal with that is to just empower as many people within our community to feel comfortable doing this kind of work, as they can. We understand everyone has, their own lives and jobs and commitments on their time. But again, just trying to help everyone take, one step forward each time.
Okay. Yeah, I find one of the frustrations with advocating on the web is you have a tendency to click a box, sign it, send it off, and never hear anything about it again. How is California about responding to letters?
From my experience,
occasionally they do.
What's that?
I say I know occasionally they do actually send you a personal response.
My experience has been like it might take them a while, sometimes a couple weeks, maybe a month. But usually I'll get eventually like an automated kind of message. I don't know if that's typical, Brett, for what lots of people see, but that's been my experience so far.
It varies a lot state to state. One of the challenges for California is that the legislative districts just have so many people living in them. My state legislative district in Kansas I think it was supposed to be about 24,000 people total, and probably, maybe 16,000 of them were over 18 and voters. So for me, even without staff, there was a decent capacity to read every email just about and, try and reply personally to most of them. The flip side of that with California is that the legislators have staff to help them with this, right? So that there's a chance for more eyes to be on the email inbox and give a response. But part of it will probably always just depend on lawmaker to lawmaker too. There are just some who are more responsive, and that's part of, what they want to prioritize. And frankly, I think one of the challenges in our politics is, and this is not one party or another or one state or another, there's always just going to be some folks who want to spend less time dealing directly with constituents and their concerns, and maybe more time just saying, they elected me, I'm here, I've got my mind made up, I'm going to, do what I think. So it's going to vary a little bit. But one of the things I always try and advocate too is you reach out in different ways. I got relatively lots of emails as a lawmaker, but very few phone calls. So I tried to answer every single email, but if someone had a hard time getting a hold of me that way and they picked up the phone to call my office, they were going to get a response, the next day, because I got probably dozens of emails a day, but maybe 4 phone calls in a week.
I imagine you get a real feeling of empowerment actually talking to a legislator face to face too.
Yeah, Jessica, you got to do that, I believe, a little bit, at least at the Free Thought Day, Advocacy Day. What was that like for you?
It was my first experience doing it, so I was super nervous, but yeah, I mean, with Brett's guidance, I knew what I had to say, and it felt like I was part of it. It felt like I had, at least the potential to change a mind, or, like Brett was saying earlier too, at least for them to know that I'm here, know that I'm a voice for the secular community, and that, we exist and our voices matter too.
And I'll say from the lawmaker perspective, I don't know many of my colleagues who were ever unpleasant for volunteers showing up for just about any cause. I think it is, no matter your political persuasion, about 95% of lawmakers just found it refreshing when real people from the community who are not professional lobbyists showed up to talk about something. So there was not an expectation for me, and again, for most of my colleagues, that a volunteer showing up was going to, have a 30-page legal analysis of the bill we are considering. You're really just kind of happy to hear about them and to have a real human being piercing the bubble that is, the state house sometimes, because you hear nonstop from professionals, right? You hear from the lobbyists for different organizations, and not to say we were rude to them, but I think, we probably held them to a different standard, whereas a volunteer showing up, I was just happy to hear anything they wanted to talk about, and to, take whatever handout they had and to look more into it. If it was a professional lobbyist showing up, you kind of wanted them to be able to answer every last question about a bill if they were going to be taking your time. But real people were a welcome change, and I think that holds up, state by state, and probably even for the staff as well, right? If you're not meeting directly with a lawmaker, but you're meeting with their legislative director or whatever the title is, for them to be able to talk with real people instead of all the paid lobbyists is refreshing also.
Okay.
Alex, I've forgotten how to raise the hand. I just want to make a comment.
Okay, you got the floor.
Paul Gilbert. A number of years ago, I used to visit Sacramento offices quite a bit for the ACLU. And I learned that one, make your appointment enough time in advance, tell them what you want to talk about, have your points really clear, and more than once, in fact, many times, they knew way more about it than I did by the time I got there. And every one of them, in fact, was a couple. It was always fun because I learned something every time that I was there. And it's my memory now is such that I don't start a conversation with anybody more than 3 minutes, things that happened 3 minutes ago. But it's satisfying to do, actually. And going to talk about things that you care about. If it's a marginal thing, let somebody else do it. But my experience was good.
Thanks, Paul. That's really right on point. And I would guess that some of the times when they knew more about it when you showed up, part of the reason was because you or someone else had reached out and said, this is the topic I want to talk about, and that bumps it on their priority list to spend some of that time, researching and being ready. Yeah. The other thing that I always try and I tell advocates, volunteers going to the state houses, but I also told this to people volunteering on my campaign when I ran, which is, I don't know is a great answer to a question because it invites a follow-up. I would actually rather send a very nice, genuine human being to one of these meetings or to knock on a door on a campaign who's going to say, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to it, but I'm happy to follow up, than someone who's, knows every last detail. Because for us, making your voice heard, sometimes it's a matter of access and the ability to repeat, what you're there for. And if you get to meet them face to face, whether on Zoom or in person, and then have an excuse to come through for them and say, hey, you asked me this really great question. I didn't know the answer to it that day, but I did a little digging and here it is. Which I should also add that part of my work is doing that digging for folks too, if they get a question they don't know. But I think it's easy to be intimidated by not having the answers, when really in this kind of work, it's a great opportunity to just be a real human being and follow up with them with an answer later.
That is very interesting. It occurred to me as issues come up, we'd always be willing to have, someone come and speak at one of our forums on specific issues and suggestions about what we do about them. With that in mind, should I get in touch with you, Jessica, or just keep an eye on the website?
Yeah, I mean, we can certainly keep in touch.
Okay. On
Yeah.
a regular basis, I'll email you once a month.
Okay. Okay.
That's wonderful. Honestly, I think, as we've talked about this, especially in a state as big as California, part of the goal is to have these connections to say, not everyone needs to be at the monthly meeting, but what we'd love to be able to do is when something big comes up is to have the opportunity to reach out to, as many groups as possible and say, hey, if you're only going to do one thing this year, here's the opportunity, right? Here's the bill to email your lawmaker about, or here's the trip to the state house other people are making that, we'd love, but that communication really helps us have a bigger impact and a bigger voice.
Okay. I was hoping there'd be more more questions coming up.
Do you mind if I turn one around for the group?
Go ahead.
I'm just curious, Paul shared his experience, but I was curious if other folks have any exposure to doing advocacy work at the state legislative level or local level too, for that matter.
Yeah, maybe Dana, you'd like to respond? Or is that just
You're muted, Dana.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I used to be pretty active with the Green Party, and we frequently met at our local office here of our state representative. And usually she was not available personally, occasionally, but it wasn't too difficult to set up meetings with one of her staff members. And so that was very interesting. And usually as they were, happy to meet with us, they seemed kind of busy, but polite, and, heard us out, and we delivered our information, whatever it was, whatever issue we were talking about. And also we met with a San Jose legislator a couple of times, and also had a good experience with that. So I think it is actually kind of a satisfying feeling that you're actually going there and being heard. And even though maybe sometimes, they aren't like terribly enthusiastic and friendly, but polite, at least you feel like you tried to make a difference.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for sharing that.
I'd like to clarify, Brett's full-time. Jessica, you call yourself a volunteer. Are you a full-time volunteer?
I'm just a volunteer.
What's week to week, month to month? What's the hours per week that you're putting in on this effort?
It really kind of depends on like where the team's at. The last few months though, it honestly, it hasn't been a lot. Maybe just a few hours, including the meeting. So it's really, and at times there'll be, even in our last meeting, one of my Sacramento representatives, she was just kind of like, this month has been a crazy month for me. I'm going to sit in on the meeting, but I can't, I don't know that I can commit to any tasks this month. And we're totally flexible with that.
Yeah, I was going to offer, I'm trying to think, Jessica, that seems right for our California group. And I was trying to think if there's like an average from all of them that I've seen. I think, Jessica and Evan are co-chairing, which means they kind of help set the agenda and do a little bit more of the administrative work to try and pull folks together. But I think for the average person on any of these groups, probably the goal is we do our, 1 hour meeting once a month, and that there's maybe even in a busy month, and Jessica, tell me if this sounds right, maybe about an hour a week's worth. I mean, it's usually, hey, can you send these handful of emails and let us know if you get a response? For some of the folks who really like the bill tracking, I guess that can take a little bit more time, but that's not something we, put on everyone's shoulder. It's really those who take an interest in checking that every few days and reading through bills probably spend a bit more time a week. But I think the goal is really to make it a sustainable and manageable thing. I've been part of a lot of political efforts that are, use up as much time as they can get from anyone and burn everybody out to where they never want to do it again, after 3 or 4 months. And really, the whole goal with this is just long-term building people up in this work and having a positive experience and continuing to grow it.
I've got to ask, I keep hearing stories about major bills in Congress that are 600 pages or something. How long is a typical state bill?
It depends on the topic, but most of them that I dealt with in Kansas, at least, were, well, I guess maybe there's different categories. There may not be a typical. There were a lot that were only 1 or 2 pages. If it was a small policy change to something, like I worked on elections bills a lot, and we had some of those that were 30 or 40 pages if they touched on a bunch of different points and statutes, but the simplest ones were a page or 2. Most policy bills, if they're not inventing a giant new program, or if they're not hopping all over the place, just depend on how the laws were written before between, different chapters of statute, are just a few pages long. Anything that has to do with spending money tends to get a lot longer, or establishing some sort of new program where there's, new rules and responsibilities. But sometimes you can have bills that are profoundly impactful that are short, and sometimes you can have bills that are just, technical cleanup language that are 150 pages long just because they're jumping all over the place. The other thing that frankly is a big help to me with as many bills as I'm reading these days is that you can have a bill that's 100 pages long, and it might really only have about 4 or 5 new pages of text. It's just amending a paragraph here and a paragraph there. And so, frankly, it takes a lot more scrolling than it does reading to make it through those, or flipping the pages, right, to find what's the actual impact of it. But there are definitely, I don't think there are, to the length that you get at the federal government, but there are definitely bills that unfortunately probably the average legislator doesn't read the whole thing before voting on.
Okay, thank you.
The worst are budgets, though. There's just a lot of pages and details involved.
Yeah, when I hear about the long bills, I figure there's probably a paragraph in there somewhere that you're concerned about.
That's what one of the things I've enjoyed about my job is hopefully getting better at finding that paragraph in the midst, finding the needle in the haystack for sure.
Okay, I'm curious if anyone in our audience here has also worked in government at some point. Yeah, I don't see any responses to that. Judith.
Yes, I used to work for the U.S. Census Bureau. I was the director of the international programs of the U.S. Census Bureau for some years. I worked at the U.S. Census Bureau for 17 years as a demographer, a population specialist, and an expert on China and Asia.
Okay, it's not exactly advocacy, but
no.
I suppose I've got similar experience just having worked on one of the censuses, and it's interesting, a lot of different kind of people in this area.
And I mean, not to try too hard here to bring that back, but it really does. When you work in the State House, who you hear from is not representative usually of the state as a whole. And I'm sure in that work, you get a really clear picture, right, of who's in the area or who, the demography for whatever area you're looking at. But it is amazing what bubbles government bodies can become just because who's bothering to show up. A lot of it is who has the money to hire professional lobbyists, but beyond that, even from the volunteer side, it's just who shows up consistently, gets a really outsized voice. And, sometimes that's fun. And you see, sort of scrappy underdogs get to have their voice amplified, but there's a lot of concerning implications to that too, right? When you just have, sometimes it's just the angriest people are the ones who are beating down the door every day, and they might annoy lawmakers, but they know they're there, and they probably overestimate their numbers just because they're there all the time.
All right. Well, I don't see any questions. I can't think of anything myself. Is there anything you'd like to say before we wrap it up, or? Because it does sound like interesting work, and I'm hoping we can at least get some volunteers out of this.
Yeah, I think the main thing is that this is a new enterprise, right? And we're really just trying to invite people to be a part of it and help shape it and grow it. So if there's anyone who's, hearing this and thinks, yeah, I'd love to be a part of monthly meetings with that, wonderful. But beyond that, at least know that this is work that we're trying to do, and that we might circle back if there's something really important, right? To ask folks to do, to hear one specific topic presentation or to take one quick action and that sort of thing. But the strength of this effort will be in folks, taking an interest and wanting to help be a part of it.
Okay, well, like I said earlier, I'll keep in touch, and I'll notify our members if there's something they might want to be involved with.
Thank you so much for having us and letting us chat with you guys today.
Yeah. Well, thanks for coming. It's very interesting, really.